You're listening to WKDW Radio 97.5 and KDWRadio.com, broadcasting from the Bishop West Real Estate Mobile Tower right here in Northport, Florida. How are you doing there, my good friend Billy?
I'm doing pretty good, John. How are you?
Not too bad. We've gone through a lot of things here recently, and I just want to do a quick follow up on Hurricane Ian and get your quick update because I know we've got a quick update on some road openings and things like that in case people did not know.
Okay. So I think last time we spoke, we had a couple sections of Price Boulevard had been reopened. Obviously, we took significant damage, as many folks remember, at the four waterway crossings, the Creighton, Lagoon, McCaughey, and Blue Ridge waterways. But I think the last time we had a chance to get together, we were still looking at one or two of those waterway crossings being closed. Obviously, not long after, we were thankfully able to get those open, which I'm sure many people have noticed has done a great deal to ease some of the traffic issues that we had at the time with people having to use Chamberlain to go north and south to get to east-west connectors like Cranberry, the highway, Hillsboro, things like that. So that's been a big boon to everything. That's been obviously helpful. Um, Debris collection, we are near I think 1.8 million almost cubic yards of debris, which again, if you were here last time, Irma saw 50,000. I believe the number was 50 or 51,000 total in total. When they were done, everybody was on their way. So obviously, we're at a much larger scale. Things are progressing. We're coming close to the end of the first pass citywide, but obviously there are some neighborhoods that have had more debris than others. Looking at the estates, and so they are still progressing their way through the estates. One thing we wanted to emphasize: if you haven't had your first collection yet, we should be there soon. We've like I said, we're just about to the point where we're just about done with the first round. Some areas have started to see their second round of vegetative debris pickup, and then when we get to the end of the first round of C and D debris, that's your home debris, fences, drywall, anything pretty much home related. Uh, we're at 2.2, where I think we've got most of the first round done. Not all of it, obviously. There are some neighborhoods that have had trouble collecting because of overhanging trees. We've got certain neighborhoods that are under considerable tree cover. They've got equipment in town this week um, that will hopefully help with pickup in those areas. And if it doesn't, solid waste is ready to step in and assist with that. We're getting every day we get just a little bit closer, one step closer to as normal as we can be at this point.
What is what's the normal totals that we would have at this point in our annual if we did not have the hurricane?
I believe it was something we had spoken to um, on the city's Facebook page before when we first started. Like the first week, we blew past even what we do in a normal year as far as yard waste. In speaking with solid waste manager Frank Lama, uh, the comparison we had was it was roughly 4,000 cubic yards typically in a normal year, normal calendar year, normal fiscal year.
And so 4,000 cubic yards. And what are we at now?
We are yard waste. I believe we're at about 1.7 million in vegetative debris. That's the bulk of the 1.8 million that we've collected to this point. Obviously, has been trees and other vegetative debris. We blew past that like on the first day.
Right.
So
So I want to ask this because we really are good caretakers in the recycling of product. Can you explain what, and I didn't preemptively ask you this, but can you explain from our viewpoint now why it's so important for us to handle our business that way, even with this being in play? This seems like if we didn't have the recycling program we have right now, we would have had a lot of distraction going on right now, wouldn't we?
Um, I don't know that. Well, that's a great question. Um, I think uh, we. I wouldn't say necessarily that our recycling program, the way we go about things, has necessarily played too much of an impact. But I think Frank Lama, has had his pulse on the city pretty well, and I think knowing that and him knowing the city as well as he does, because he's been here a while, has helped in large part the areas that we could get to immediately, help collect our most hard hit areas, quickly before it's too. And we do have some neighborhoods that uh, were hit fairly hard that we couldn't get to right away, and we're continuing to work hard to get to those areas. And again, some of that is attributed to the tree cover, things like that that make the operation of these big claw trucks, kind of difficult.
Right. So as we're going through this, the situation that I was kind of talking about is that we have like these staging areas for things, right? And
Correct.
and so did we have to increase that staging area to take in this amount of consumption, or was that handled differently now?
Um, I think when they initially were looking at the areas where we were gonna stage the debris, I don't know that we necessarily anticipated the level of debris that we've seen. So they had picked out sites previously, before the storm to be prepared. We talked about it last year before storm season, but they make a plan every year with Serious Environmental, as far as where are we going to put things, what's the process going to be when collection begins, and things of that nature, so that once the storm hits, we're hitting the ground hopefully running. And so when the storm hit on September 28th, obviously did significant damage, and quite a few roadways were impassable. But on the following Tuesday, Series had their trucks here. They were getting certified, ready to collect, and within a week, the next Wednesday, they were out collecting. I don't know. I think the initial estimate that they were thinking was going to be about 1 million, and once we hit the field, we said, okay, it's going to be way more, way more than 1 million. Um, and so I think they chose sites that had the ability to be expanded if necessary, and I think that's what we saw with the initial vegetation site, was that we had just the sheer volume. It necessitated having a large site available. When the C&D debris site was selected, it was obviously done with the idea in mind that there's going to be a lot of home debris, and let's make sure we have space for it. What we did come across, at least with the vegetative collection, is areas like the estates had, I think it's fair to say, far more vegetative debris than quite a few other areas of the city, just based on the fact that there's a lot of large lots out there. There's a lot of tree cover out there, and the neighbors out there, a lot of them appreciate that. That's why they bought out there, and a lot of that came down. And so the sheer volume in the estates, the issue we've had there was running that material across town to our site off of Atwater Drive. Uh, when you're collecting that much, kind of slows the process.
Correct.
And so what they did was, a couple of weeks in, realized, hey, this is going to take forever if we keep doing this way. Let's find another site. So they found another site off of Toledo Blade, north of 75. And that way they could get that material to that site faster, shorten the transport time. Trucks get to the site faster, they get back to where they're collecting faster. And we have seen, as someone who lives out in those neighborhoods, have seen a significant uptick in the pace of collection.
And so we're really making on the fly adjustments even today
Correct.
on what we're currently picking up in the community, aren't we?
Yes. So it's obviously it's a fluid situation. And we've had neighborhoods that called in and said, hey, we still haven't had a pickup. What gives? And I check with Frank. He's checking with our contractors, and we say, oh well, they started on this street and then got pulled to another. We're heading back there now.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Price Boulevard. We know it's up and running, but voters have spoken. We've got it up there. Can you explain the value of what's going to take place probably over the next 4 to 7 years with Price Boulevard?
So, as one of essentially two, maybe three major east-west connectors through the city, where you can start at one end of the city, travel all the way to the other end of the city, with the other being 41. You've got I-75, and then Tropicare covers a decent chunk east-west of the city if you're willing to go out that way. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of traffic on Price, and I think anybody who's lived in Northport, as an 11-year resident myself, and possibly even longer than that, if you've lived here longer than that, anybody who's driven on Price knows it's kind of a necessary project. It's kind of been overdue. As the city keeps growing and more people move down here, we're one of the, I think, fastest growing cities in the country, population wise. It just gets more cluttered every day. And I mean, you can travel any time of day. You're liable to get stuck sitting at the light at Salford and Price. Toledo and Price can get busy in the morning with school traffic and morning commutes and things like that. So it's a necessary evil. Um, I think it's a project that it's going to be a little bit of a pain as it's going on. Um, I don't think it's going to be fun by any means, but it's a project that has to happen, and at some point you rip the band-aid off and make it happen. And
Absolutely.
then ideally, we get on the other side and it's two lanes each way, and things flow a little smoother for sure.
What do you think is going to happen with Price Boulevard now that we've been through a storm of this magnitude? Are they going to reassess the build out of that structure at all? And since it's not truly in its building stage, it's truly in its infancy stage, isn't it?
Correct. So previously, we had essentially been in the funding phase. They had done the design, they'd done the permitting, they had got all the land parcels that they needed to acquire before they could begin the project, and it was a matter of finding funding. As it happens, a near Category 5 hurricane taught us a few lessons shortly before the road bond referendum passed. And so there are some elements of the design that are going to be revisited. Obviously, the waterway crossings being damaged and being impassable as they were. The redesign process is going to take some of that into account. And what we've got to do is figure out, okay, how do we harden these crossings so that if we get another, Cat 5 hurricane, ideally never, but if it happens and we get that volume of water again, how can we prevent this roadway from taking the damage that it did again? And so the next step, will be to revisit the design a little bit, to account for that and apply the lessons that we've learned through Hurricane Ian.
So, being out during that storm, like I was trying not to drive on the bridges that were marked road closed. I did obey all the traffic markings that were out there. We had a lot of citizens that did not do that. Um, and I know that our roads have taken more damage because of that. Um, I most people would say bad behavior. uh,
Okay.
so, I are we addressing some of those issues for the near future too, when it comes to working a Cat 5? I'm going to call it Cat 5 because only a few miles an hour off. I think they've misjudged that anyway. But the the whole thing with driving on a road that's closed that caused more damage, essentially, because we had trucks blocking Price Boulevard. We had big dump trucks blocking Price Boulevard,
Right.
and people were driving around those trucks. And I did speak with one of the truck drivers, and he was literally just throwing his hands in the air, uh,
Right.
because people were not paying any attention. Are we addressing that? Not with building Price Boulevard, but in our assessment now of what occurred during this whole Category 4 5 episode here in Northport.
So I think the issue, and this tends, to be a little towards the side of you can lead a horse to water. Uh, we when you put a dump truck in front of a roadway and say this roadway is impassable, turn around and go the other way. There's only so much you can do to stop somebody who's going to drive around that, go into the roadside, go into the ditch, go around it, and risk that. What I would say is, having seen the condition of the roadways, and if you watch the video that we put up when Price fully opened, you get an idea of it. Um, it would not have been pleasant if you went around one of these road closed signs, and that's why at some point we put out the message to please stop going around the road closed signs. Please stop going into these areas where we said the road is impassable. It's not something we did for fun. We're not looking to inconvenience people. Um, we're residents of the city too. We've got to drive around too. We're not trying to make life intentionally make life harder for everybody. Um, so we can just emphasize, you know, taking heed of the message that's being put before you. We did have a photo of someone who went around a road closed sign, and the roadway collapsed and their truck is sticking out of this collapsed section of road. Um, and if you saw the video with the before and after conditions of the roadway, you would have saw it would not have been pleasant to drive over that and give way to the collapsing roadway. At some point, I believe we had police officers in several areas where the road was closed to kind of help enforce that. I know we did at the beginning before Salford, between Sumter and Salford. We did have police presence there to make people turn around. We had people that were trying to walk across the bridge there. No, and trying to again emphasize it's not there. The roadway is not there. You know, why risk that as opposed to just going around?
So I do have a question from Dan Barry. I think we just answered it, Dan, but exactly what damage did cars cause driving on blocked roads? Many lived close to these blocked roadways.
So I mean, there's stretches between obviously where the roads were closed,
Right.
and we understand to a degree uh, if you're one of the residents that lived on Price and you're between these roadways and you really have no other option. Thankfully, the intersections with Cranberry and Chamberlain, in Salford, we didn't have any homes directly in front of the waterways. So if you had to get out, you could. but it's more about where the road was damaged by the waterways. When you're putting extra weight on those roadways that have been undermined with the water, that are already coming apart, and you're putting extra weight on those, you're putting extra pressure on those. It's You're just pushing further damage.
So I'm going to ask you a question because I love the fact that he asked this way, um, and I'm going to lead you right to where I think people need to wake up. Is that when you're on Price Boulevard and you're driving over the bridges that were closed, those structures were designed to take water underneath. That controlled and lack of control or controlled runoff that we had coming through there increased when those bridges gave way, which made all that water that was being somewhat controlled downstream stay upstream and not flood other areas. What happens when Price Boulevard gave way behind uh, Walmart? Where did all that water go that was really being strained, uh, sort of with this circular pool of water, like going down a tub? But at least it was maintained behind a wall of road. When that road was gone, that water was now free flowing, wasn't it?
I mean, to a degree, and that's one of the issues when people were concerned that the water structure crossing over Tropicare Boulevard over by Van Camp into the Woodland Estates, that was, when people were concerned that that was giving way, we didn't think the structure, we had no reason to believe the structure wasn't there. But had it not been there, what you're looking at is the residents that are on that waterway south of Tropicare are going to see the water level rise much more quickly. You're going to have less time to react.
Correct.
Uh, we thankfully we didn't have a huge concern like when the water control structure behind Winn Dixie went out, or didn't go out, but the erosion around it happened. We didn't see a huge uptick in the speed of water flow and how fast the water south of that rose. But I think that was also, that was a matter of the water was already so ridiculously high as it was. There wasn't significant flooding impact because of it. But yes, when you're talking about these water control structures, anything that is helping regulate the flow of water, one of those fails, and water is going to move faster than it should.
We haven't really talked about Hillsborough in the sense that uh, there's a bridge right behind Kia. I was there. I filmed it. I've got a video of the whole daggone thing.
Mm,
The fact that people were driving around that signage down that road. Uh, I stopped. I can't begin to tell you how many cars uh, that were going down that road. The the stretch of 45 feet. How deep is Cocoa Plum?
that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. I
Would you,
know
would you be gracious enough to say it's more than 10 feet deep?
yes,
Okay.
in a lot of areas, yes.
Yeah. So you're 10 feet deep, 45 feet across, and you've got massive amounts of water coming down, road closure, feeding into a 4 foot wide, 3 foot deep crossing that not just goes under Hillsborough, but if that would have let way, it would have flooded 41 and the houses downstream. That's a fact. That's not a joke. That waterway couldn't have handled that amount of water, and that was during a time frame that 75 was shut down.
Right.
We had to readjust all the traffic around to 41. We had road closures going on everywhere. We had people ignoring the safety factor of the road structures that were blocked for safety issues. And really, I'm going to be a little bit more heavy than my good friend Billy because he does represent the city. But when these signs are out there, there are many reasons why you should keep your butt off the road,
Right.
and truly keep your focus on what's going around you. Because if we would have lost, if we would have lost 41 because of that water structure giveaway, and now that's flooded, and we've got nowhere to go other than all the way around 776. And by the way, 776 wasn't in good shape either because all the traffic that was happening there.
Right.
The reason that we took a citywide, why there was a safety net of road closures, was because along with the fact that these roads were not safe to travel on, didn't you have to in your meetings have to figure out which routes that everybody was going to take and how you were going to keep the flow of traffic? And I'm not just talking about our city.
Right.
We had so much happening south of us that the traffic flow from north had to get down south to actually help people that were worse off than we were.
Right.
And aren't those all factors in, oh my God, I know we got to shut this down, but we've got to get traffic flowing and keep them safe?
Right. So there was a lot of attention paid to how, especially when 75 was closed, how are we going to keep traffic flowing? One of our biggest obstacles, at least early on when 75 was closed, was having the supply station at the church right there on 41. Um, Thankfully, that one, um, they had the traffic plan for that pretty well intact, was pretty well flowing so that it didn't impact 41, too badly. Um, but yes, there was a degree of when we have to close the roads, um, how do we do this while keeping enough roadways open to try to avoid as many log jams as we could? And when you're talking about, especially with Price being the major east-west connector through the heart of the city, obviously closing any section of that is not easy, as we saw over the summer when we had to close the McCaughey waterway crossing, and that was only for 4 days. Um, it's not a decision that's made lightly. We're not. There's nobody that comes to work in the morning and goes, okay, what roads can we block off to just truly mess with people today? And that I think that was one of the more frustrating stances that we saw taken while we were working on these waterway crossings was people that didn't think it had taken any damage, or they were convinced there was no damage done, and we could open up Price now and have things, back to normal. Uh, I will tell you I believe it's a Creighton waterway that is directly next to Public Works. One half of the entire road was washed out. You had at best one lane, and even that was eaten into by some of the erosion, and it's not safe to travel. The more weight you put on that road, that single lane, that you've got erosion creeping in from the edge, the faster it's going to wash away, the faster it's going to eat away, and pretty soon you're not going to have any lanes. So it was closed down so we could repair the roadway before we put traffic back on it, and it was exactly the same, pretty much the entire every crossing. I mean, we've all seen the infamous pictures of the Blue Ridge crossing, which was literally just crumbled. There was not any solid piece of roadway bigger than maybe 6 to 8 inches in that entire section. And the utilities that had to be moved around, had to be fixed, had to be replaced before we could even pave over that. There was no part of this where we were like, well, we're just going to go out and we're just going to mess with people for funsies. We're just, let's see what we can do today to inconvenience everybody.
And could and I don't want to say it did, because it probably didn't help that people were driving on those roads that were compromised early in the process. I I can't. I, part of the problem I have with this whole conversation is that common sense has to creep in at some point and
Sure.
tell you we're building roads on sand. And if you go to the ocean and you build a sandcastle and the water hits it, the sandcastle's gone pretty much instantly. Okay, you might have little pieces left, but it's pretty much gone. Well, our roadways are still built on sand, and anytime you put that amount of water pressure behind the road and you continue to drive on it, I just feel like there's a suction that happens every time you drive over because you're really putting water between the road and the sand.
Right.
And so you're eroding the road structure itself the more that you drive on it. But you have to realize that the water that's being held back upstream from that road structure is actually stopping it from flooding the houses below. And I got to tell you, I Blue Ridge flooded, and they're not in the flood zone.
Right.
We're not talking about flood zone areas at all. We're talking about houses that flooded that were in non-flood, and it wasn't because the city didn't step up and have control of what was happening. It was because the amount of water that was coming down. Didn't we have everything opened up 100%?
We did. We did.
Didn't we prep ahead of time for more water?
The thing is, September was extremely wet. We got a lot of rain in September. I don't think we went more than a day's time without getting rain of some sort, whether in the morning, the afternoon. I don't think we ever really went one 48-hour period where we didn't have rain. And so we understand during hurricane season, a hurricane like this can come up at any point. And if you're waiting till 2 days before to start moving water, it's not going to be fast enough. So we've had the waterways open. We had them open for several weeks before the storm got here because we understand it's hurricane season. All it takes is one development and you're 4 or 5 days away from, potential disaster. So we had waterways open. We were evacuating water. The one big example I can give you that I saw personally a difference over 3 weeks' time. We had an afternoon storm that had flooded Rough Street, and so we went out there to get pictures of flooding on Rough Street, and we got pictures of the water structure that runs underneath the road on Tropicare that crosses over into the Woodland Estates, and at that point, the water is going in. It's churning around the pipes that run under the road. It's that high. You can't see the pipes. It's moving, but it's moving slow because we've had a lot of water. 2 days prior to the storm, I went out there to get pictures of the area, and you can see the entire pipe. The water is flowing through there freely. It's not moving slowly. It's not churning. It's free flowing through the pipes. All of our water structures pretty much the same. If you went and looked around the city at the time, they were free flowing. The water is flowing out of the city because, again, we understand you're only days away at any time from a heavy rainstorm, heavy thunderstorm, a hurricane. The problem is I don't know that anybody could prepare properly for a storm that is Cat 4 on the verge of 5, bringing a 16-foot storm surge that is going to just sit over your area for 7 hours. As someone who has lived in Florida for 38 years, this was the first time I've ever experienced anything like this. Think about how big Hurricane Irma was. And when Hurricane Irma hit the state, it moved up the state quickly. It didn't sit on top of anybody for 7 hours. Even Hurricane Charlie, the biggest damage was done because we didn't expect it in this area, but it came through and it moved on quickly. It was powerful. It was fast. It did its damage and moved on. Look at the comparison because this was compared to Charlie for obvious reasons. It took almost an identical track. And they took Charlie and put it within the eye of Hurricane Ian. That's how big the storm was. And on top of that, it felt like it went nowhere for 7 hours. We got 7 hours of maximum wind,
Absolutely.
maximum rain, and just took that beating.
Well, do you think? And I've talked about this uh, to multiple people. I think media side of things. I think we on a national level. I think we get so caught up in ratings and hype that we talk about a cat one and a cat two like, oh my gosh, and we get people who have never been here. I don't know if Dan Barry, uh, and I appreciate the questions and the thank you, and I hope we did answer your question. I hope you didn't take a direct hit on what I was saying, because the truth of the matter is the we don't learn from these things unless we talk about them openly and answer questions. And I love the fact that you asked the question. Uh, I engage in this with the city of Northport because watching the behavior is the hardest part. Even when you explain why, I having done that and having explained why and having people tell you to shut the hell up and they drive on it anyway. When you tell them face to face what they're doing, the comment that I got from one citizen was, "But I want to go see things." Okay, uh, how about the reason that that road is closed is because they don't want you out seeing things,
Right.
and it was because that road wasn't safe. And the truth of the matter is, and I got to ask you this because in your evaluation of some of these road closers, isn't first aid a critical part? If there would have been an ambulance needed to get in, if people would have continued to drive their big trucks, I stopped several trucks with big trailers on them, and I'm like, what are you doing? You're not just hauling you're not just driving a VW bug across there. You're actually bringing heavy weight across the road closure sign.
Right.
It's insane. That you think that nothing is going to happen, but at the same time, don't we have to take into consideration when we're doing these things the safety of the community and what's going to happen if there's a 911 call placed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, to the safety point, we try to emphasize to people, uh, even before this, we've tried to emphasize to people, if there's water over your street and you can't tell how deep it is, it's better safe than sorry. If you can take the long way around, if there is a long way around, take the long way around. If there's not a long way around, um, maybe go to dinner or something and give it some time to subside. If you're not sure how deep that water is, because if you go in and it's deeper than you thought, you're potentially out of vehicle. In a situation like this, where a lot of the city was underwater, you're taking your life into your own hands. And another aspect of it was, let's say, John Doe drives his vehicle through Salford, where it was flooded, heavily flooded, um, and they get stuck. Well, when they get out and they safely get to land, thankfully they're okay. But now, if we get a 911 call, somebody has a health emergency in that neighborhood, and that car is now blocking the roadway, it is now more difficult for our first responders to get to that 911 call. It's going to take them longer to get there. It's going to be harder, more difficult for them to get there and assess what needs to be done and get back out in a timely fashion. And a lot of these cases, time is of the essence. When the emergency responders are going out, every second counts. That's why the fire departments are placed where they're at, because every second counts. So when you're talking about vehicles that went into floodwaters and then had to be abandoned in the middle of the roadway, now you're causing issues for first responders and other people that need those first responders. That it's slowing down the process essentially.
And you know the funny thing is yeah, we've talked about this several times since, and I love the fact that we're going to continue to talk about it because I think we have hurricane season at least once a year. And this was an eye opening experience for a lot of people who have now moved here for the first time,
Right.
never really have lived through a hurricane. It is not an ice storm. It is not snowfall. This was truthfully one of the worst storms I think across the board as far as America is concerned, uh, ever. Let's see, is Dan Barry asked real quick, is price going to be 4 lanes?
Yes,
I hope the heck it is.
it
Uh,
will be two lanes westbound, 2 lanes eastbound.
yeah, and well, that's what boulevards are. Dan, I hope you're a fan of that. Softening a boulevard down to 2 lanes and a turn lane in a city of 70,000 that's going to go to over 100,000 would be foolish money spent. And we've already approved the funding, so I hope that they do the right thing there and follow through. Uh, you can make it pleasing, you can make it functional, but at the end of the day, you've got to make these cities safe. And the city of Northport has really public works. You guys take what we're doing serious on your side, and I know the effort is there uh, to make sure that things aren't truly uh, like rigid. Uh, Sumter, when it was done, was a 2 lane road, and it's softened now, and it flows nice, and they've got the curves in there. I don't know that you need all the curves, but the whole thing is we're not trying to make this a block city, a block uh, grid. We do have a meandering Price Boulevard, or a meandering Sumter Boulevard that goes down to 41. We've got the bike lanes. We've got everything there that we're taking into consideration. Are we going to use that same kind of judgment on Price Boulevard too?
For sure, for sure. Again, it's when you're talking about the volume of traffic that we have and will continue to see increase. Taking all that into account is why it's going to go 2 lanes each way. It's not, they're not just going to expand and put a turn lane in the middle the entire way, because that's not really going to do us much better. So we'll have that, and accounting for bike lanes and sidewalks and everything of that nature that makes the city more connective. Um, there's a big emphasis on increasing the mobility and the connectivity within the city. Uh, like you said, Sumter, when I moved to the city in 2011, we were just about wrapping up. I don't even know if it was a full year that I was here that it was done. So my recollection of Sumter as it was, I never saw it pre-construction. I just saw the parts where it was 1 lane each way while they were working on it. But obviously, it's a big difference now to have 2 lanes each way. It allows traffic to flow more freely. With the bike lanes and the sidewalks and everything, allows people to get around more easily. And obviously, that's something we also want to replicate with Price Boulevard.
And he's got another great question, because if you live on Price Boulevard, there are a lot of concerns. I get it. But he's got another great question. He says, how will that impact the existing homes? Not much room in their front yards. Everyone will need to back out of their yards onto Price Boulevard. Um, I get it. At the same time, you've got 4 lanes. The flow of traffic on 4 lanes is going to be much better than two. And the size of your front yard was actually, when you purchased, was actually surveyed if you had a survey done. So you know how far it normally goes. Um, a boulevard, city of Northport, don't we run boulevards and roads and avenues differently here? There, roads and avenues 2 lanes, boulevards 4.
Um, I
For
don't know
tech,
if that's
for
I
tech,
don't know if that's the technical, but it does it does seem that way for sure. Yep.
yeah,
I
and
mean,
and a lot of people, and he is 100% correct that it's going to make it a little more difficult. Now, the I think along Price Boulevard, the one thing you don't have in your front yard is a septic tank in most cases. It might be on the other side of Toledo Blade, but I think don't we have water and sewer down Price Boulevard now?
that's a great question for utilities.
I, I,
I'm
I
not sure
believe
how
I
many of those
believe we
people are.
have that currently. Dan, if you know that off the top of your head, please type it in. I'll throw that up. And I truly appreciate your questions. These are great questions. But you also have, if you don't have the septic, you also have a slot for possibly a turnaround.
Yeah, so I know, um, it's again, this is a process. It's not going to be easy. It's I don't want to say it's not going to please everybody, but there are areas, obviously, people who live on price. You're gonna lose some of that front yard that's close to the roadway, but
Well, okay, let me hold off there because I'll ask the question. I'll probably answer your question or put you in a spot, Billy, and I don't want to do that.
okay.
The fact that people are counting their front yard as where the city actually owns
Hmm.
part of the problem, and I don't think Dan was. I think Dan was 100% talking about when the road goes in. But the nice thing is I think there's a little bit of a judgment there being placed on where the bike and the sidewalks are going to be. So the the 30, what is it, 30 or 40 feet out from your house roughly, on most of those homes, you're sitting at the edge of your property line, and the rest of that roadway should be 4 lanes. But right now, it's grass in your front yard, and you're cutting
Right.
it every day or every week. But it's really the city's property to build out the road in the future. Correct?
Correct. Yes, and that was going to be my next point. Is it's land that's accounted for by the city, and so visually speaking, you're going to look and go, well, there goes a big chunk of my front yard, but in reality, it was city right of way anyway. And I think there's also going to be, with the engineering, it's not just going to be a blind tape measure. Let's take as much of this person's yard as we can. There's accounting for all of that. To optimize the roadway while I guess minimizing impact necessarily on homeowners already on Price Boulevard. Um,
A little bit different than what we had to deal with on Sumter because Sumter was so much wider and we didn't have as many homes impacted from the build out, correct?
Correct, correct. So if you look along Sumter, there are not a lot of homes directly on the roadway.
Correct.
So there was more room to play with there.
But I
I
don't think we have the width to do like the service roads to soften that, do we?
No, I don't think so. No.
And I kind of know that, just for judging how things are going to go. You put 4 lanes in there. Uh, Dan has like a gut reaction, which I'll throw up there because he's been so great. My gut reaction is it will be tight, and those who live on Price will have traffic much closer to their home. They are going to be closer to their home. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts around that. But I actually
Right.
think that the flow of traffic on Price uh, won't be as intense because there'll be 4 lanes each direction. You won't have the log jams that we have currently, at the stoplights, when it's all said and done. Even being a cross town connector, uh,
Right.
I think if we had 4 lanes there, we'd all go. Because I said the same thing about Sumter. I really did, because I was here during the transition of Sumter Boulevard, and we went from 2 lanes to four. And I'm thinking, we're dealing with traffic on Sumter, but it's not terrible. Well, now you go down Sumter, and the flow of traffic on Sumter, while it's still close to homes, there's a great flow. It we're moving traffic through there, and it doesn't feel like you're in heavy traffic. But you go up to Sarasota, uh,
Right.
and you're in the middle of traffic
Stop and
heaven.
go everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's actually, yes, while it's going to feel like it's closer to your home, I actually think it's going to feel different because log jams of trash trucks being and different things like that happening, even the school bus pickups on Price Boulevard, even though you still have to stop, uh, once that bus closes down and pulls the sign in, your traffic's going to flow around versus being behind that bus the whole way through. So
Right.
I got to believe it's going to fix a lot of problems too.
And I think the one thing you just touched on briefly there, that it's going to help traffic at least in certain time periods on, I believe it's Tuesday and then Friday is solid waste pickup when you're going westbound on Tuesdays, and when you're going eastbound on Fridays, when you've got a garbage truck that has to stop and pick up recycling or garbage or yard waste, you'll still have another lane available to get around that, as opposed to now, if it's not clear coming the other way, you're sitting behind that garbage truck for who knows how long.
Well,
Um, and
and the truth of the matter is you still have a problem if you're backing out on the price today. Today,
right,
backing out on price today is more dangerous than if you had 4 lanes.
I agree. I
Um,
think again, like you mentioned, when you're talking about if you've got six cars and they're all in one lane, it's a little more dense than if you take them out, you spread them out, you got 2 lanes. Some of them may be going faster than others, so they move along more quickly. So while the roadway technically will be closer to your home, ideally the traffic is flowing better and there's not a situation. I personally, when I go home, I back into my driveway. Thankfully, I don't live on Price or any of our major roadways to where that would be an issue for me, because I hate backing out of my driveway, and I live on a street that doesn't have traffic like that. Um, there are times when I'm traveling on Price where I think, man, I would hate to have to back out of my driveway during, especially when you're talking about school hours in the morning, in
yep.
the afternoon, traffic hour when everybody's coming home from work. Um, so ideally, this will help traffic flow a little more, and will make things like that maybe a little bit easier. And again, this is a project that it's time has come. It's been long overdue, um, and it's going to be there are going to be some growing pains. There are going to be days where it just absolutely sucks to live on Price or travel on Price. Uh, but the longer we wait to do it, the worse it's going to get.
Dude, if we hit 90,000 in this town and we don't have it, I
Right.
can't imagine. And I don't live on it. I'm going to tell you, I don't live on it. I am 100% for it. It's so needed, but it was needed 15 years ago. It should have, this should have been a very hot and solid topic when I moved here. It took them forever to get Price or to get Sumter, and I agree with you, Dan. The setback on Sumter is totally different. It is not nearly the same, and it's not going to feel like Sumter. It is not. That area, to put everything needed in that area and really try to please everybody. The city of Northport has zero chance of pleasing everybody on Price Boulevard. Zero. Um, their setback is huge on Sumter. It's not going to be designed like that. There was so much more land available to do that it's unfair to compare the two projects. Where you can compare the two projects, though, is the flow of traffic was needed on Sumter and it's desperately needed on Price.
Right.
And I think that's where it goes. And Dan's got another comment on the setback for construction on Sumter was planned years before knowing the plan was extended to 4 lanes on. Yeah, I get that. Um, we've been looking at how long have we been looking at plans for Price Boulevard?
Um, let's see. I think it was probably a year or two after I moved here in 2011
Yeah, so
was when
and
the initial talk was, hey, we're going to look at expanding this. Let's start looking at plans. It's been a while for sure.
and we're not talking about plans of Price Boulevard between Sumter and Price that have been talked about. We're talking about future plans that also incur uh, Sumter to pass the high schools to Biscayne, correct?
The current scope of the project is Sumter to Toledo Blade,
Yep.
but I'm sure some of
Future,
that is with an eye on the future to, eventually at some point, those roads are going to need to be widened as well.
yeah, we're beyond those roads being widened at this point too. I'm going to say that as a citizen, that those roads going in and out of the schools, and there is no homes over there. Uh,
Right.
that is in desperate need of assessment in the very near future. But you have to start somewhere, and the most critical part is actually right there where all the residents are, because that's the logjam that happens in most cases on a daily basis, isn't it?
Right. That's when you're talking about you have people leaving for work, you've got bus stops, you've got solid waste trucks. These days, you've got some of the debris trucks. There's a lot of traffic, and especially when you're talking about the morning traffic, you're talking about the afternoon traffic. There are times even in the middle of the day, it doesn't. It's not morning school traffic or it's not traffic hour traffic where it just there seem to be a lot of people on Bryce for whatever reason.
Well,
Uh,
at 4:30, in between 4:30 and 6 o'clock, if you get off at 75 onto Sumter, you slide down to Price Boulevard, you turn left onto Price. You're pretty much able to order your to-go meal uh, if you have a passenger in your car to run over to McDonald's, and you won't move very far, and your passenger will be back in the car with a meal.
sure.
That is a problem,
Right.
and that's because it's not 4 lanes, correct?
It's that. I know we have, they're looking at a study for the traffic lights along Price that is also going to account for a future expansion of Price um, because, the traffic signals are also programmed based on engineering and traffic counts and things like that. And obviously, with the city growing as rapidly as it is, that's something that impacts that. So the current traffic conditions, I think everybody can agree, are a little rough. and I
100%.
don't know anybody that wouldn't agree that price needs to be widened. It's just the disagreements are going to be with how it's being done necessarily because, like you said, there's not going to be any one solution
There isn't.
that does it for everybody.
And unfortunately, there are going to be people out there that feel like they got slighted, and unfortunately, I do feel for them, uh, whether they were told that boulevards are 4 lanes or whatever. I know as a realtor, um, I disclose all that stuff. I legitimately will tell people, you're moving on to a boulevard. Boulevards are 4 lanes. Seriously, you need to think about this if it's going to be something that's going to affect you in the future, because those are all factors in purchasing. We've had so many years of lack, and I say this, um, lack of growth with our roads. that people felt very comfortable buying where they knew their front yard didn't go that far.
Right.
They knew 100% they knew. So things have to be looked at totally different. But I've got to go off the air. We literally just talked past 4:05, and I'm gonna get tagged. So
Okay.
Billy, I appreciate you, Dan Barry. Thank you very much for participating. It's been a great
Absolutely.
show. Thank you guys so much. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you next month, the fourth week of the month. That's when Public Works is on. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Bye, guys.